I wanted to write a villanelle, hoping it wouldn't take all day and leave me shouting, "What the hell?" like finding the P in the shell game or a 3-card Monty display. I was not wont to write a villanelle, but I wanted it to be written well. Well, whatever else can I say, sometimes we make our own hell. There's a myth I could never dispel. I felt like a drunken Hemingway as I sat down to write my villanelle. Summarized the form in a nutshell, found the rhymes and ordered them this way, building up like a lyrical hell. I won't kid myself that this will sell to a magazine that might overpay. I finally wrote my villanelle and it turned out to be funny as hell. I wanted to be a fiction writer. I loved Vonnegut, still love Vonnegut, was exposed to his work at an early age and thought that I want to be a writer when I grow up. But then as I tried that and took some courses in it, it seemed to me that my stories were reading like outlines of stories rather than stories. So I started exploring poetry to bring more imagery into my fiction and never went back. I spent years writing poems and journals that I'd never expected anybody to ever see. But at the same time, when I got to the point where I did want to share it with people, I couldn't find a group, so I started one. If you can't find what you're looking for, then make it. My name is Jim O'Brien. I publish as James Escher, and I am a poet. My earliest memories of poetry, of course, started with Mother Goose and big books of all of these short nursery rhymes and children's poems, and those stay with you. And then as I got older, I started looking more to song lyrics to keep that fluidity in language. And then once I got to high school and beyond, I was able to find good poetry to sustain that. I started going to workshops and taking courses, first at Parkland and then at Eastern, exploring literature and poetry. Wound up in a writers group that was a good experience, and semi-productive, but it did not have any longevity because people were moving away and having babies and such. And then my own daughter got to be about 10 or 11, and so I had to put everything aside for a bit. And then when she got to her last years of high school and into college, I had more time, and so I started a poets group in town. At the same time, another fellow was starting a group, and we saw each other's flyers on a Common Ground co-op bulletin board, and so we called each other and we joined forces, and he has since moved on to Missouri, but our group, the CU Poetry Group, is still going strong. I have two different modes of writing. I have poems that I write that have the benefit of revision and that I submit for publication, and then there's poems on tap that I write at art fairs, and I did a residency here at Sip Yard last year where I just sit down with somebody and have them sit down and ask them what they want a poem about, and sometimes they know right away and sometimes they don't, and we just talk it out until I have enough material for a poem to type up for them on the spot. Those have no revision and occasional typos, but it's very different and also very unique in that there is no filter between me and the reader, the recipient. So I enjoy those, and then I do take a picture of each one of those because I can mine some of those lines. I come up with a good line and I'll use that in another poem later. This one in particular was at an art show in Springfield, Illinois. So there were all these artists and this young woman came by, and she was probably either maybe a senior in high school or freshman in college. She had this big camera, and she'd been walking around. And when I'm set up, in addition to the typewriter, I usually have a pack of tissues out because there are tears in a lot of the poems, either from me or from the person it's for, because people want dedications, and so sometimes they're sad. But I had this pack of tissues, and this young woman thought, oh, I'm gonna stump him. I want a poem about this pack of tissues right here. She said, I want a poem about this pack of tissues right here. And I looked at her and thought for a minute, and thought of what she'd been doing and some of the art that was around. And so I started typing, and I came up with this poem called Still Life with Tissues. One might expect apples in a bowl, or maybe a wine glass in a cabaret, but this was a half-empty travel pack of facial tissues, or maybe it was half full. Is it the artist's place to judge, or merely to represent what they see and deliver it in oil or pastel, or maybe film? A photographer wandering an art show, capturing images so beautiful, so lifelike, you can't help but to tear up at the honesty and the tragedy of not having a Kleenex handy. There's a monthly open mic now that is at the Iron Post right here in downtown Urbana called Poets at the Post. It's the second Monday of each month, and we are into our second year doing it, and it's been very successful. We have a lot of repeat customers. I judge the success of that as how many people showed up who were not there to read poems. We get more audience than readers. That's a good night. So, and we usually hit that mark pretty easily now, so that's good. Even though it's called Poets at the Post, we encourage all spoken word, fiction, memoir. We have people reading all sorts of stuff. It's not limited to posts, it's just a catchy name. So for Boneyard this year, I did a collaboration with a photographer named Karen Deering, and we had a stack of her photographs and a stack of my poems, and we tried to put those together and match them up for the exhibit, and they were on the wall at a venue in Champaign. But there was one photo that I wrote a new poem for. The rest of them we had used poems I'd already had, but she had one photo of this eagle on a branch, and I wrote a poem for that one, and we had it in the exhibit, and now it's just been accepted for publication in an online journal, and it will be available later in June. You can check my website to find a link there once it's published. And it is called Fly Right. I can't keep my head away from the brick wall for very long before another false start ends with a thud, 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 tearing at my sense of well-being. Frantic honking draws my attention away from my chair. I go outside to where a flock of geese struggle to get into the familiar wedge formation. I understand their flailing and feel at one with them now, comforted by their inability to form a proper V. This makes me feel better about the world, about the end of the promise. Winter approaches with surety, with the dedication of an eagle perched on a bare branch, surveying his landscape for signs of life, which he will capture and eat for lunch. That collaboration was a lot of fun. We each got to pull out some material and look at it a new way. So that's one of the things I like about the poetry group and the poetry workshops is even if I've seen a poem of mine, I've revised it, I've been through it, what seems like 100 times, it's new to everybody else, and they'll bring help me see new insights into it. See You Haiku is a feature that runs in the Sunday News Gazette, and in which we ask people to send in a haiku, and myself and two others, Will Rieger and Ann Hart, go through these submissions each week and try to find one that's seasonal and timely, and then we'll run it in the paper, and then it's on their website. News Gazette had been running that for a while with a local haiku master, Lee Gerga, and then he retired, and I noticed that it was missing from the paper one week about 3 years ago, and so I emailed and said, "What's going on? Is that a temporary hiatus?" And they said, "No, he's done with it." And so I said, we would love to take that over, because one of the things that the CU Poetry Group strives to do is to keep poetry visible in the community. So we have it. The CU Haiku is another way to do that. Every week in the newspaper there's a haiku written by somebody here, and it's paired with the Ted Kuzer American Life in Poetry column that they run. So another thing that the CU Poetry Group does to keep poetry visible in the community is we collaborate with the MTD. This is our 3rd year of the MTD Poems, where we run a contest locally, ask people to submit a poem of 8 lines or less, because it has to fit on the poster that goes up with the PSAs inside the bus. And then the MTD runs them in the buses from April 1st to June 30th. And that has been a great success. We have people say, "Oh, I saw the poem on the bus," and so we're very grateful for their support as well. So the future for my poetry, I have a number of poems out there that have been submitted. The next step is to assemble enough for a chapbook, which would have some published poems and some new poems. I'm working toward that. I've got a couple of different themes. One is just collected poems that don't necessarily have a unifying theme. I'm also working on a group of rock and roll poems that currently is called Erasures, but none of them are erasures yet. So there's that group. I'm also working on a project assembling these poems that I've done on tap. So I'll be working on those that will have those poems plus a little bit about the person or the situation or what the prompts were that generated those poems, because that gives it some context. It's a big step to take your poems from your own notebook out to expose them to other people, because you're exposing yourself. But when you find other people willing to do that also, either in a workshop or at an open mic or a reading, you've learned that energy, that vulnerability gives you an energy to keep going, and you find yourself going deeper in your own work and being a better poet for it.
To get involved and support the Urbana Public Arts program, please contact the Public Arts Coordinator Rachel Storm at rlstorm@urbanaillinois.us or 217-328-8265.